So it really seems like the only thing that's worse than racism in schools is trying to cure racism. Because based on what a school in Fishhook said, the attempt to cure racism was just far worse than the actual racism. So, to talk about this in more detail, here is Byron, all the way from Kibuki. And Byron, tell us a little bit about this because I think this is a hilarious, like gloriously fun story to talk about.
Yeah, so this is obviously the story that in Fishhook they had some allegations of racism because that never happens in South African schools, and 9 times out of 10 we actually find out later on that the news article of whatever the alleged racism is complete horseshit. But apparently there was some racism in Fishhook. So what tended to happen is they obviously got the Western Cape Educational Department all around the table. They went through to the Fishhook High School. They said, what happened? There are a bunch of allegations made. We're not going to repeat them just because we'll probably end up getting into
Yeah.
shit for it.
But they are on
Uh,
screen.
mm, yeah, but they're on screen. But what did then happen is they all said, okay, well, what we actually need is we need some diversity, equity, and critical race theory training for everybody in the school. So lo and behold, they went off and got some diversity shill, probably some white Karen somewhere that wants to show her virtue signaling, and they employed her to go there and do some diversity training. But diversity training was so bad and so horrendous that the students afterwards have now needed counseling. And the official school have issued a statement saying, oh, we're terribly sorry about the diversity training that we issued. We know that it's psychologically harmed all the kids at the school, and we have temporarily suspended the training and instituted a degree of psychological treatment for all of the people that underwent the training. So you have to ask yourself a question of, well, we clearly seem to have fixed racism by beating the living daylights mentally out of these students, causing them psychological damage. And the question that I have is, how bad was the training, mate? Like, it must have been pretty horrendous.
Yeah, I mean, because we all know that racism exists, right? But what is racism for millennials is just like what we would call normal speech, like 20 years ago, right? Like you make a joke
Mm.
about, or not a joke, but if you like use a certain racial slur in the context of the time, say you're reading a book and use the N word because you're reading Huckleberry Finn, it's within the context. It's not because that person saying it is the actual racist they're using in the context. But now that is deemed to be racist. So just quickly, let's just go back a little bit to the original, you know, questions about the school in terms of what actually happened there that was deemed to be racist. And it's like, you know, the teachers measure our afros and tell us to cut it if it's too long. Okay, they got a hair policy, racist. A boy has been reported for sexual assault, but no consequences. That's not racist, that's sexist. If that's true, of course. So, Fishhook, the school, learning about all these anonymous Instagram accounts that call the school racist, said to themselves, well, you know, what we actually need is for the Western Cape Education Department to come in and help us sort this out. And the Western Cape Education Department is woke as all hell, and no doubt said, what we really need is to pay someone 50, 100,000 Rand to come in to the school and basically just explain why all white people are racist, and that will make it a lot better. Obviously, that has backfired now because that diversity training has. I can't even keep a straight face. That diversity training, by all accounts, seems to be far worse than the actual racism 2 years ago that it was trying to fix. It's like, oh, you have a sore thumb. Let me just amputate 5 toes. That will make it better.
Yeah, I mean, I quite often don't understand the logic of these schools. So they will turn around to you and say, okay, well, what we really need to do is we need to tackle sexism, racism, Islamophobia. And then they'll say, forms of, how should we say, your sexual preference phobias. So what will turn around and you'll see that they'll all be like, okay, what we now need to do is we need to go through some diversity training, teaching you to be good little people and not question any of this stuff. So for me, it's really weird because these ideas that they're trying to combat often seem to be in contradiction of each other. The Islamic view of homosexuality isn't really complementary. And so by trying to create a space where literally any ideology that you want reigns supreme, you effectively make it a nihilistic kind of space where nothing reigns supreme. The only thing that any of these kind of theories seem to all agree on is that the white person's at fault here, regardless of what they do. And so the training seems to be very centric on making the white students accountable for things that quite often they're not accountable for. There's only so many times you can do that before you start to create a victim culture, a victim narrative. And the funny thing about victims is that they eventually crumble or they fight back. So I don't really think that this is the best way to get what they want to achieve done. How about you?
Well, interestingly, I mean, in this particular regard, like the diversity process was driven by the Western Cape Education Department. And then now the Western Cape Education Department is going to do the counseling for those people that found the diversity training extremely difficult to bear. So at the end of the day, this is just a fuck up over an initial fuck up. As we said years ago, all the stuff is basically like hysteria for the most part. I mean, racism does exist, yeah, but there are ways to deal with it in material ways. They have to fundamentally have a revolution about how school works or not. And any attempt to deal with this like bullshit racism creates far more discord in the long run than if you just nip it in the bud early, assuming that it's real, and most of it just is not real. But at the end of the day, I mean, let us know in the comments down below. What do you make of all this? Where the attempt to negate racism is far more traumatic than the actual purported racism in the first place. It's very funny, personally speaking. And I think principals and school governing bodies and all these people need to grow a pair of real testicles and just say no. It's very easy. No, the strongest word in the English language. We are not going to destroy our institution for your feelings. It's really not that hard. Anyway,
100%.
comment below. Thanks for watching. Cheers.